Engraving has a reputation for being overwhelming and very difficult to do. Now, the technique that I use to do all my engraving, I find to be the easiest technique when it comes to actually lining things up. This technique works very well if you want to engrave one thing or if you want to engrave 10 things on the same mat. And I'm going to show you how to create this template so that you can reuse it for all of your acrylic engraving needs. My name is Kelly Rossouw, and let's get clacking. Now, to start off, if you're wanting to use the quick swap housing with the engraving tip, you are going to need a Maker or a Maker 3 machine. Now, if you have one of the Explore machines, you can use the Thomas Creations engraving tip. It comes in two different variations, the normal engraving tip and the precision tip. According to the creator, the normal engraving tip is mainly used when you want to fill things in, and the precision tip is when you want to do very fine engraving works. If you buy them both, it's about $40, and you can use them on both the Maker and the Explore machines. As far as I know, that this does void your warranty, so proceed with caution. I haven't personally used them myself yet, but I've heard very good things about these. I'm going to be using the quick swap housing with the engraving tip, but we will cover being able to use both of them, so don't stress. The acrylic that you engrave on is going to need to be either 2mm or 1mm acrylic. Now, I'm going to be making a bookmark, so when it comes to making bookmarks, I prefer to use the 1mm acrylic as I find that it sits a little bit better in the book and doesn't affect the spine as much. I'm also going to be using a design from Creative Fabrica, so on Creative Fabrica, I'm going to search for Bookmarks and press enter. And if you don't have Creative Fabrica, I highly recommend it. I use it for so many of my projects. You can also just print out bookmarks. My subscription is an annual one and it works out to $5 a month. But if you don't have a Creative Fabrica subscription yet, check my affiliate link down below. You'll be able to get that exact same deal that works out to $5 a month. I can't recommend it enough. I absolutely love it. So under the categories, I'm going to tick the crafts and illustrations categories, as those are typically the ones that I want to use. And as you can see, there are so many different bookmark designs that you can use. A lot of them are printable ones, but we're going to be using more of the laser cut illustration types, and this is the one that I have chosen. So this is a laser bundle graphic, but that doesn't really matter. You can absolutely use it on your Cricut as well, because it is an SVG. So you're going to click on download, and it's going to download to your computer, and once it's done, we're going to open it up. And then we're going to extract it to and save it to our computer. Then in Cricut Design Space, we're going to start a new project, and I'm going to click upload in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to click upload image and drag and drop the file into Cricut Design Space. Make sure that the name is something that you'll be able to find in the future. And because it's an SVG, you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to remove any backgrounds. It is perfect just the way it is. So we're going to click upload. I'm going to then select it from the recent uploads and click add to canvas in the bottom right-hand corner. Now it is teeny tiny, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I can see that it is in two separate colors. So I'm going to right click and ungroup it so that I can delete the back one, the back color, because I don't need all of these. And now I can just delete all of the ones that I don't want to use. So I want to engrave this book nerd one, so I'm going to delete all of the designs that I don't want just by selecting them and pressing delete, and I just have my book nerd one. Next, I want to make sure that the sizing is right. So this is 9.5 centimeters by 3.67, which is actually kind of perfect. What I like to do when it comes to sizing my bookmarks is I add in a shape to my canvas, a square, and I make that square the size of my bookmark. So the width will be 4. For you, it might be 2 inches. So you'll need to measure your bookmark and see what size it is, just to make sure that it'll fit in the actual bookmark. I'm then going to unlock the proportions so that I can have the height and the width two different numbers. So I'm just going to click that little padlock, and I'm going to make the height 12 centimeters. Now I'm going to right click and send this to the back so that what I want to engrave is actually in the front, and I am going to change the color of that just for now to white so that we can see it a little bit better. I'm then going to click drag and select both of the layers, click align, And I'm going to align them to the center, just so that I know where everything is and that it's all aligned. I'm going to group that up for now and put them off to the side. Now this is the step in the process that makes my life so much easier. I'm going to insert another square, and I'm going to make the size of the square 30.5 centimeters or 12 inches. And I'm also going to right click, duplicate that square, and I'm going to make this one 29.2 centimeters or 11.5 inches. Now, for those of us not in the US, we normally use the metric system. But for this technique to work properly, we actually need to use the imperial system. So I'm going to change my design space from centimeters into inches. And for those of you in the US, luckily you get to skip this step. So under my name in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to click the little drop down and I'm going to click on settings. Now I'm going to click on the canvas tab and change it from metric to imperial and click done. And the reason why we need to do this is because I actually need to see the grid lines on the mat on my canvas. So these two squares, I'm now going to select them both and center them. So we're going to align and center just to make sure they're in the middle. This is going to be my actual template that I used to get everything aligned on my mat. So I'm going to bring them up and move them into the top left-hand corner of my canvas. Now, of course, normally when you make things in Cricut Design Space, it doesn't matter where it is on the canvas, as long as everything is attached, it'll automatically orient itself differently when you go to the Make panel. But in this case, I'm actually using the grid lines on my canvas as guidelines. So what I want to do is attach both of these layers, and I'm going to change the operation in the top left-hand corner from Basic Cut to Score. Now I do this for two different reasons. Number one, so that I can see the grid lines of the mat underneath it. But the second reason is because you can have a score and a cut function on your Cricut separately. And what this will do is it will keep everything in place when you design it on the canvas, and then when you go into the Make panel, you won't have to rearrange everything. So you're doing all the work now, and you don't have to rearrange it in the next step and make sure that everything's aligned, because everything will automatically be aligned here. And if you want to remake this project in the future, you then don't have to go back and realign everything again. You can just design it on the canvas and just go make. You can just change out the designs and put things in exactly the same space. It makes mass producing a lot easier. And even if you don't have a scoring tool, that's fine. The Cricut is going to score, but we're not actually going to put anything in the tool holder. With the scoring stylus, you can have nothing in the A column and it won't do anything. So the machine thinks that it's scoring, but we're actually tricking it into not scoring. So the scoring line is going to be used purely as a guide for us to be able to get everything exactly where it is on the mat. So I'm going to take my design and I'm going to move it somewhere on the mat. I'm going to zoom in. Here is where we're wanting to line everything up. So you can do one of two different things. You can align everything so that the middle section of your bookmark is lined up on a grid line. So we're going to use the actual grid lines on our cutting mat as guidelines where to place the items, and the grid lines on our canvas will line up exactly with what is on our mat. So for this bookmark that I'm going to use, so we can line it up with the edge on the 1st inch grid line if we want to. And so then what we'll do is we'll zoom in as far as we can and make sure that the edge is actually set onto the edge of that line. And we'll then want to have that line and the bottom line lined up. Now the cutting area on our Cricut mat is 11.5 inches. So the outside line we're only going to use as a guideline of where we're going to put our bookmark. So we can line our bookmark up with the end and we can line our bookmark up with the 1st inch line. And this will make a lot more sense once we go into the next stage of actually lining everything up. So the square that we have for our bookmark is just a guide. We're not going to use it, we're not going to cut it, none of that. So we're actually going to hide that. If you want to engrave only the outline of this design, just as it is here, you can leave it as is. I like to fill mine in just a little bit so that it's a little bit thicker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the offset feature, and I'm going to make the offset line on the inside of our design. We don't want to leave it on the outside. So this number that we have here, 1/4 inch, I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going to type in negative 0.0002. Yes, we're going to be going that small. So then I'm going to click anywhere on the design, on the block, and you'll see the little blue lines are showing up on the inside. So I'm going to click apply, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And if you want to do a slightly thicker line, you can click offset again and then apply again. If you're using the Chalmers Creations engraving tip, you will leave it as basic cut. You won't change it to engrave. It needs to think that you are cutting it normally, but it'll actually just stay exactly like that. But because I'm going to be using the quick swap housing on my Maker 3, I need to change it to engrave. So I'm going to select all of the layers that we want to engrave in the layers panel on the side of the screen. And I'm going to do that by clicking on them, holding Shift on my keyboard, and clicking on the other layers that we have. And I'm going to change the operation from basic cut to engrave. If you have a Maker and it's not showing up with that option, make sure that your machine selection up here says Maker or Maker 3. And you'll see how the design changes to look a little bit more closely like what we're going to actually get it as at the end. The next step we have is to hide the big score box that we have at the end here. One of the score blocks will have a little error message. That's because it's too big to cut on any of the machines. So when you click on that error message, it says the image is too large, reduce the size to 11.5 inches by 23.5 inches or less. So we're not going to reduce the size. We're using that one just as a guide to align everything on our mat. Because like I said, the grid lines on the canvas will be the same as the grid lines on your cutting mat. So I'm just going to click on the little eye icon that works as a show versus hide tool, and I'm going to hide that. If you wanted to engrave more than one design at the same time, you would just repeat the process that we had here, where with the block showing, you could just repeat them and line them up on each of the grid lines. So I'm going to group all of these together, right click and duplicate, and show you what I mean. So we're just going to line these up, right click, duplicate, and make sure that each one of them is aligned to the bottom and aligned to that inch grid line. So we'll have one bookmark on the 1 inch line, one bookmark on the 4 inch line, one bookmark on the 7 inch line. So they'll all be lined up like that right next to each other. Then we're going to hide all of the squares at the back, and there we have 3 bookmarks laid out that we can engrave. So we're going to select everything on our canvas and we're going to click attach. And this way you know that when you have everything lined up in the next panel, it's going to very clearly line up on your mat. So we're going to save our project before we continue. So I'm going to make this Book Nerd Engraved Bookmark. And I'm going to click save. And once it's saved, I'm going to click make. Now you'll see why we have the 11.5 inch border with just the scored lines. And on the inside, we have our bookmarks. Because if you can see here, they line up exactly where we want them to be and where they were on the actual canvas itself. So if you want things to line up perfectly, just use that block around the outside. It works like a charm every time. I'm going to click continue. I'm going to connect to my machine, and it doesn't really matter what base material you select here. If you're using the Chalmers tool, you can select something like medium cardstock, as your operation won't be set to engrave, it'll be set to basic cut, so you will have more options available. But because I have the engraving tool, these blocks are all grayed out and I can only select a few of them. So I use the craft board setting. If you use the craft board setting as well, it will then engrave with the full pressure and it'll do a double pass. So do a few tests before you do quite a few of them, especially if you're using the different tool. So I'm going to select craft board. The important part to remember here is that if you are using a maker, you need to change this from the scoring wheel to the scoring stylus. So you're going to select edit tools. We're going to select scoring stylus and then apply. So what you will see is you will see load scoring stylus in clamp A, which we're not going to do. We don't need the scoring stylus. We're going to load the engraving tool in clamp B. And if you're using the Thomas tool, it'll say your fine point blade, and that is perfectly fine. That is what is supposed to be. And then we are done with everything in Cricut Design Space, so we can go over to loading up our mat and getting everything ready on that side. Now I have a strong grip mat that I use only for engraving, so it never gets any kind of chipboard or paper or anything left on it. And I like to do this just because I have one clean mat that I know always works for engraving. And I can actually just leave my tape exactly in the same position. Like at the top here, I've used the same principle to make cake lifters, and then I can have my bookmarks on the other side. So I like to always use the bottom of the mat for some reason. So I'm going to take the protective covering off, and I'm going to remove the tape just because I want to get everything aligned properly. But I am going to reuse it, as we can reuse this tape a few times before it loses its stickiness. And then on our bookmarks, all acrylic will have two sides of protective sheeting on it. So what I like to do is use my weeding tool right at the top, just underneath where the little tassel will go. And I like to pull it off from there. In case I do scratch it with the weeding tool, it's underneath where the tassel will be, so it'll mostly be covered anyway. And then I pull it off. And you only really have to pull it off on the one side. We are going to place down on the mat. And just like we did in Design Space, we're going to line it up so that the edge of the bookmark is on that line and the edge is on the bottom, just like that. And now, because I don't like to get my hands on my strong grip mat too much, because the oils from your hands will eventually affect the grip, I like to use my brayer to make sure that the bookmark is stuck down. Then I'm going to take my painter's tape and use that to stick the bookmark down a little bit more. Try not to completely cover the bookmark. Try and get the tape to just cover the edges, because we don't want to engrave over this section, as the engraving might not come out all that well. You can overlap a little bit more with the top and bottom pieces, because we're not going to engrave over that section or that section right up at the top there, but it's going to be mostly there. And then we can start lining it up again further with the next line. So we have this on the first line, so we'll now need to put the next one on the fourth line. 1, 2, 3, 4, so it'll be on number 8 because the mat is flipped around. So we're going to repeat the same process until we have all 3 of them down on the mat. Remove the cover, line up the bookmark, press it down, and then tape it down. And then you can brayer them again at the end, just for extra luck. But honestly, these guys aren't going anywhere. And now we be sure to load these into our machine so that this is on the bottom. And because we've already selected our material, the load button will be flashing, so we're just going to load it straight in. Don't forget to check your engraving tip before you start. If you've done projects with your engraving tip, you will see a lot of debris around the edge, so we just want to take that off. There you can see all of the acrylic engraving dust, so we just want to take that off and make sure that our blade tip is clean. Now this is the quick swap housing. It has the silver dot at the top, and when you press that, the bottom pops off, so you just need to make sure that you have that one. And if you have the Thomas tool, then it'll be loaded into the B clamp as well. So you want to just load it in, close the silver part, push the white part over and press it in closed. And then when we're ready, we can click play and it will start engraving for us. It is first going to do the scoring tool with the A section, as you can see here. It's going around the entire mat. and it's scoring that edge, but there's nothing actually there. And then once that's done, it's going to check to see that it has the engraving tip in. And if you have the Chomas tool, it won't do that step. It'll just go straight to the engraving, which is what it's going to start doing now. And it's going to lift up and down quite a lot, and it's going to probably take quite a while. But it's nice and quiet, and it's very therapeutic to watch. So enjoy the process, and we'll check in once it's done. And now that our cut has finished engraving, we can take a look at what has happened. So we can just eject the mat because we don't need to run it again, and then take a look at the design. Now it doesn't look like much at the moment, but we're going to clean it up. So the designs have all been engraved, and what I like to do is take the bottom piece of painter's tape off first and use that to kind of pick up a lot of the excess debris and dust that is on the bookmarks themselves. This helps keep my workspace a little bit more clean, and then we don't have all of these little pieces of acrylic dust everywhere. You can see just how much actually comes off. Next, what we can do is lift up the tape on the one side just a little bit, and then you can actually lift up the bookmark and pull it out. Now, as you can see, I like to leave my tape there so that the next batch of bookmarks that I do, I don't have to retape anything. And we can then take a closer look at our design and just how beautifully it has engraved. Don't forget to take the back layer of the protection off the bookmark. And now we can get an even better feel for what it looks like. Perfect. If you want the design to stand out a little bit and not just be plain white, you can actually use alcohol markers to color them in a little bit. These are just cheap markers that I have, so I'm going to take a black one and color in the book node part. And just color the whole thing. Don't worry about the alcohol marker going on the edges, because I'm actually going to clean off the excess with an alcohol swab. So I like to keep these handy, and we're just then going to rub it over. And you can see how now it's both colored and engraved. And of course we can continue that throughout the entire bookmark as well. As the alcohol ink sometimes gets a little bit moved around when the alcohol swab is quite full of ink, what I like to do is to just use another one to clean it up before I'm done. And there we go, a nice fun colored and engraved bookmark. But if you want to learn how to emboss with your Cricut Maker, check out this video on the screen. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more Cricut videos in the future, and remember, be kind to someone today. See you soon.